So like I said, we're happy to have Curtis with us today, basically. Like I said, he's the director for the Electronic Benefit Transfer Project, one of the larger projects within OSI. And he's going to talk to us a little bit today, as brings a wealth of experience in managing large projects. And certainly the EBT project has been held up as a good example of a very successful project that's been going on. So we're happy to have him here to go through some discussions on defining successful partner relationships.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Contextually, we're gonna change directions a little bit. What we're supposed to be talking today is about strengthening vendor partnerships, and in my arena, we're going to talk about is discussion about vendor relationships, and specifically, I'm going to talk about some fundamentals. And in those fundamentals, there are some technical. Much of what we've talked about in the first hour are technical. They're, in some regards, they're absolutes to one degree or another. The life cycle issues are applied systematically amongst the projects. But what we're going to talk about has a technical component, but it's got some soft skills involved in that as well, right? You got, when you talk about relationship, you talk about everybody has different styles, but we try to find some common ground on things that work, and so we're going to have a little discussion on that. I'm Curtis Knapp. I'm with the Office of Systems Integration. Carlos referenced us a couple of times. We do manage a lot of the big projects in California. We get some good accolades, and we have our bumps and warts as well, right? Previous to, I am currently and specifically the director for the Electronic Benefit Transfer Project, and it's basically we manage benefits for programs in the welfare department. Our sponsor is CDSS. Do we have anybody from CDSS here? I was hoping we at least had one person. And we have what's called an electronic benefit card, and people on welfare for either food benefits, food stamps is what they previously called them, or cash benefits, use those at retailers or ATMs. Just give you a little magnitude so you understand the importance of the work that we do and why it's important for us to have good vendor relationships. Additionally, I also was the director at ISAWS, which is was one of the 4 consortiums that actually did the eligibility for people on aid, and now I interface with 3 of those 4. ISAWS retired. Just prior to me leaving, it was about a 16-year system, $1 billion. Last year with EBT, we processed over $12 billion in benefits. We had over 1 billion transactions. It's amazing down in LA. 3 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday, you can go into our system. There's literally thousands of transactions going on. People are at Rayleigh's, or they're getting their checks cashed, or what have you. So the things that we do are important, and we have these partnerships. Let me state unequivocally, I fully support the public-private partnerships that we have with the vendor community. And it's been part of my work career for the better part of 20 years. And we each have our role, and we both have common goals. I think we can agree upon that. We're going to talk about it a little bit in a minute. Just so I know who the audience is a little bit, how many, either one or the other, who would consider themselves program or policy people versus strictly IT people? Policy people? Okay. IT people? Okay. So this is the right audience. And the reason I say that is you will understand what I'm saying, okay, is that CDSS is our sponsor, and they'll come to us and they'll say, I need this, and I need it by August. And we look at them and go, really? And they've been our partners for such a long time, and you know, you wonder, and you do education and you do orientation, and you think they have an understanding of IT, and vice versa, they think we have an understanding of policy, right? Well, now conversely, let's look at that a different way. How many times does the state go to our vendor when requirements have already been fully developed, and we go back to them and say, oh, by the way, we forgot to define this requirement and we need this. That's when your relationship comes in, okay? So I'm going to focus very specifically on some fundamentals that I think are important. If you can walk away with a couple of things, then that'll be positive. And the reason we're going to start here is not a great storyteller, but I thought this one was good. 2 mosquitoes, way out in the forest. There are 2 of them. They're flying around and they're hungry and they're flying and they're flying. You've heard this. Hopefully you'll laugh with me. They're flying and they're flying. As they're going through the forest and they're way out there, they see a cyclone fence. And on the cyclone fence, there's a sign that says nudist camp. But they don't have a clue what that means. So they pass over the border of the nudist camp, and you can imagine what they see. So the one mosquito looks at the other one. He's still got a frown on his face, and the other mosquito knows what that means, and he's smiling, and so the one says to the other, what's the matter? And he says, where do we start? So that's what we're doing today. You need to start someplace, so we're going to talk about a little bit of successful vendor relationships and what are those fundamentals. The key aspect, and over the last couple of years as I've attended the CIO Academy or different forums, you'll see the pyramid, you'll see some of the common threads, and I think because they're proven and they're standard. But the key issue is roles and responsibilities, and then under those roles, people who have the roles and responsibility regarding the quality and the resources and the schedule. And this is a little bit different than project management, where resources / could be cost, right? And it can be dollars, or it can be people. It can be equipment. It can be a lot of things. Schedule is pretty standard. We've replaced what we would call scope for quality because that's an essential point to our relationship with our vendor. So if we go to the next slide. Oh, here, why don't you, since there's only 3 slides. Okay, so we're transitioning away from this technical aspect, and it's absolutely Freudian slip, I guess. Under roles and responsibility, these are just a few of the dozens of things, but if you could walk away with a couple of issues, and I want to draw the correlation between the vendor and the state, and they're important for both. It's absolutely in a state-vendor relationship, it's absolutely positive that you know what the roles and responsibilities are. And you need to define, document, execute, and measure whether or not people that have roles and responsibilities are meeting those, and how do you do that? So you need to be able to measure that. So as an example, we've got an IV&V resource here. Is the IV&V resource attending all the meetings that they should? Are they doing, clearly one of the things they do is status reporting. Are they doing the status reporting? And the important issue is the minute you, and we'll hit these a couple of times, the minute you start to see that those things are happening, that's the time you take action. It's important that you make roles and responsibilities a part of your project orientation. On some of the projects I've been on, it's not unusual to have 300 people or more in the development effort between the vendor and the state staff, and then other consultants as well. It's absolutely important that they all know what the other people are doing, at least at different levels and different degrees. But it's important for everybody to know what the roles are, and not only the roles, what authority do they carry, because that's important. It gets back to the concept. Don't burn any bridges, and if you know who your parties are, you know who your audience is, you tend to have a better relationship, if you will. Under roles and responsibility, recognize ambiguous and unclear roles early. I've had, in trending, when people are coming up with concepts or new strategies or especially in the academic environment, you'll see new terms, and then all of a sudden, on the news, you'll hear one network will use a term, and pretty soon all three networks are using those terms, and they come and they go, and there's popular and they're trendy and so forth. But on ambiguous or unclear roles, identifying those early is you need to act on those, and you need to measure those, and if they're not being met, they go from a risk to be an issue, and you need to act on the issues. Here's an important point under roles and responsibilities. Contracts are a two-way commitment. It's absolutely imperative that your teams know the contract. And this morning in our discussion, we talked about, the contract, and I'm on the middle sometimes on these things. The contract's the Bible, okay? It is what it is. But you have to have some flexibility, to, especially in long procurements, things can change. But it's absolutely imperative that you have a good contract manager on both sides. They know what their roles and responsibilities are. They meet on a regular basis. And the state has just as much of an obligation as the vendor does to know what it says in that contract. It's absolutely imperative. And I would even go to the point to say that some of our projects are very, very long, that you take breaks to kind of redefine what the contract says, bring your folks in, say, okay, let's go over this again. It's been a while since we've gotten into this area, but it's a two-way street. Those are important issues on roles and responsibilities. Next slide, please. This is important. How many are in the news? We've had last year could have been in some regard, we've had some difficult automation bumps, if you will. And sometimes people think it's, well, they can blame it on a vendor. Some folks say, well, gosh, they didn't do, adequate oversight, if you will. To cut to the chase, it's actually a reflection on both of us, is it not? And if you go in early on in the orientation, your teams know. I'm proud in some regard. Right now we have a prime contract, and we have 5 consultants that do some additional work for us. We meet with all 58 counties on a regular basis in the 3 consortia, and for the most part, those stakeholders, they don't really know if it's a state employee or a vendor. We don't. It's not something that we hide. But if somebody's doing a presentation on organizational change management on some issues, and they're the expert in that regard, they present that, and we find that a lot of our folks, unless they specifically ask, they don't even know who those are. So it's a reflection on both of us. You need to have clear expectations of quality and set the standard early, in addition with your vendor. At the first sign, and they want to perform. I said I'm a strong proponent of public-private. They want to perform, but what things influence quality? Cost and schedule, right? So, given another 2 weeks, they tell you that their quality will be back up to speed. You need to be true to that. You need to be true to all those components. And everyone benefits. Early on, we talked about the review process and assign teams early as well. And it really is important to acknowledge that not everyone can review everything, but have the right people involved. Okay. Back to quality for a second, because I did lose my thought a little bit earlier, but it's back. At least 2 of my really big procurements in the RFP, when the bids were submitted, and I love this works well for me. The vendor has said somewhere in their proposal that they're world-class vendors, or they have world-class expertise in conversion. Okay, I actually had seen that. And so when we have bumps once in a while, I pull that out of my back pocket and I say, I thought you told me that you were a world-class vendor. You have to do it. Much of this soft skill things, you have to do it with tact, and you have to do it with a certain amount of humility and humor, but don't be afraid to use those kind of things. Resources. Key personnel are called key for a reason. Again, this is about vendor relationships and fundamentals. It's been my personal experience that when a project starts, I had one where during the course of the whole project, from project initiation to implementation, moving into M&O, we had 4 different project managers, right? And I don't like that. I like continuity. So I have two things that I try to do. And again, it's setting the expectation early on that these are the folks you proposed. And unless you can give me a very compelling reason why you want to take them off the project, I'm going to hold you to that. Now they have some liberties with that, so that's that give and take issue. But the key point is if you have key people, make sure that they're appropriately staffed. Here's another item that we talked about early, and I'll share what motivates a vendor. Is it their reputation? Is it profit? Clearly it's profit. In California, we have a lot of folks in the vendor community that come in and want to participate in California because it's a plum. If they can get a contract award in California, then all of a sudden they may move from mid-standard to class standard, and when they go out to do other business, they say, well, we did California, and they were very complex. So what is it that motivates, and if you know that, it helps you in your relationship, and the more you can do. That's where it kind of transitions into the last comment on the resources. Understand the vendor culture, and vice versa. They need to understand, and it's absolutely paramount that they understand our culture, because we have HR issues, we have DGS and Caltech procurement issues, and clearly it's very frustrating for them. So we need to know that it's frustrating for them, and we have to work and talk about those kind of things. Schedule and progress. Work plan is critical, but it should be realistic. It looks like we have a group of folks that have participated probably in state government for some time. Some of our younger staff or new people to state staff want to please either their boss or the parties they're working with, and so they'll make agreements that maybe they shouldn't. It needs to be realistic between the vendor and the state, and otherwise you're going to cause problems. Status reporting is also critical. Cut with the fluff, and you do that in the early expectations in your vendor relationship. Cut out the fluff and get right to the real issues. And what's the next sequence if you don't do a good job with issues? I mean, these are the consequences of risks not being mitigated, and they actually become real issues. And once they become issues, you've got to take action. And in order to do that, you're going to have to come to the table with the vendor. So risk and issues are inevitable, and you should use them as a tool for success. You should, if you have a common goal and you work through some very significant issues, it creates a bonding relationship, if you will. I wanted to make before I take some questions, I wanted to go back and talk a little bit about something that was referenced early, because I think it's an important point to make, is that in my early IT career, the thinking was to clearly define every requirement. And I was on a project where we had several thousand requirements. In EBT, we have somewhere 854 very specific requirements. It says that if a card holder loses their card and they call our IVR for a request, it's got to be delivered to them within a certain period of time. And that's measurable, and that's specific, and that's probably okay. We've seen a trend, at least with our sponsor, Because projects last such a long period of time, sometimes both the technology changes, but the program or the policy changes as well. So for instance, if we had a requirement that said you have to have a green screen, all right, now we're getting our sponsors saying, don't do that kind of stuff. Would you ask the vendor to come in and make a recommendation on what color they think the screen should be. They may say it's purple and have them make their justification on why that should be. And so we're seeing a little bit of movement in regarding less specifications in our requirements. And sometimes I'm not sure if that's good or that's it could be part of an RFI. But we want to be consistent and be as clear as we possibly can with the vendor community. So I talked about roles and responsibilities, and then 3 significant issues that are germane to the state and the vendor relationship, and that's the quality of their work and our work as well, resources and how you manage those, and then issues with schedule and progress. Questions?
Kind of back to where you were talking about the green screen, is that driving us because we should be looking at the vendor community as more of the expert? So is that allowing the leeway of allowing them to provide us knowledge? I mean, that's where I see we should be kind of driving to, right? We have an idea of what we want to do, but you said it wonderfully, how and what we want to do, right? But then we're pulling these vendors, and they should be the expert in these fields, right?
Right.
So we need to be able to allow those requirements to be built around some of the knowledge they pass to us, not putting these constraints on.
So 6 years ago I wore a watch, and then I got my iPhone, and I didn't need my watch, and things have changed so fast. And now they have an iPhone that you put on your watch. So now I'm, pinching.
So now you're wearing the watch and watch.
Yeah.
How about Google Glass?
And I think the state is always slow to react.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I said I like the public-private relationship is there's lots of things they bring to the table, but 2 things they bring to the table. Most of your good organizations have a great research and development component to their companies. They're thinking way out ahead of us, and they're trying to bring us along, and we're just dragging back, right? We're just dragging back. That's where that open communication comes in, and they're able to be much more flexible in the workforce. I mean, they can get, if a new technology does emerge, they've got people coming right out of the universities, okay, that carry that knowledge, and they can be much more responsive. If we lose one of these key folks, I talked about not letting them let them go, but the same thing holds true for they need to bring in a quality individual. And we have every obligation to make sure we do that. And I find that basically they do. They bring in quality folks. Any other questions?
How do you discourage your vendor from replacing key personnel? Because that was a very difficult thing on one of our projects at DMB. Was they committed to bringing these certain people with experience and expertise, and then 2 years in the project, those people are gone. They're bringing new people on. The people they're bringing on, even though the contract says they have to have equivalent experience and knowledge, and they have to replace the individual with someone of equivalent experience and knowledge, that doesn't happen.
Yeah. One of the really good things about being in California is that we are the umbrella, okay, in terms of the size of the awards of the contracts, the profit opportunity in California, and so forth. I would encourage everybody in your project in terms of building relationship with your vendor is you might have a great peer relationship. You need to build that executive relationship. So if I'm a midterm, project manager, I have every need to know who, I would prefer to know who my peer's boss is. And I would prefer to conference with them. I would prefer to meet them. It may not be right away, might be 3 months. They might be located in Dallas, or they might be in San Francisco or wherever. I want to meet that person face to face. And so when these issues come up, I've already got, I'm not going to pull that trigger unless I have to. I'm going to work with my peer on the vendor side because I don't want to lose his or her trust in that regard and go over their head. But I want to say, you know, I'm not happy with this situation, and maybe we can jointly get together, and because maybe him or her is feeling some pressure from his boss, and if you already have that relationship, and it's true on the lower level too. In the vendor relationship, you should know who your project manager's boss is and or team of folks, and you should know the line staff at least early on. You should know who those folks are, so that you can have a stronger relationship. I don't know if that answers. That has helped me previously. Anybody else have any experience in that regard?
We've experienced that quite often. So is it, you're just saying work on the relationship, there's no contractual, there's nothing?
Oh no, we have very strong contractual.
Yeah, but you can't say this body has to be, because we went through that whole thing, right? Well, we're gonna replace them, so here's 5 resumes of 5 qualified people.
You know, that is a
And,
different.
you get into the situation, well, we've invested all this knowledge transfer and all this time into this individual. So even if they're skilled in that tool, they're not gonna be skilled in all the knowledge. The ramping up, you're gonna re-ramp someone else up, right, to replace them.
Well, you know, sometimes you build such a good relationship with your vendor community that they, you know, it almost feels like a friendship. And what happens in friendships, sometimes you leverage that to, you know, to get in your best interest, and that's when you have to recognize, and I think the vendor community understands that. This is a business proposition. This is my position, and I find that a good period of time it works. The other side of the coin is if they meet their obligation on the requirements for the person, but you immediately find that I've seen them come in with folks when I didn't want to do that. They're actually better than the other resource. But if they're not, you have every right to take that action.
It just sets you back, though. We've had experience where we've had the working levels, or anybody on the vendor side of it, they bring people out of state, and then because of tax purposes, they have to let them go after 1 year because they don't want to pay the taxes. So, so how do you deal with that kind of a thing?
Yeah, and then they come in on noon on Monday and they leave on noon on Friday. And
Thursday nights.
But there's practical reasons that the vendor does that. Yeah, that's true too. And so that does it not really come down to, like I talked about with a little bit of a change in context and what I was going to talk about. You got the technical aspects of a very strong RFP and the contract that aligns with that. Use it. The other side of it is build that strong relationship. Let them know that you're strong. You're fair, but you're strong, and you're not going to be a pushover. But you're not going to do things that'll harm them unnecessarily. So it's a balancing act, isn't it? Anything else for me?
Just a quick. This come out from other conference similar to this. Would it be a good idea? This is just idea to have a vendor tracking system, because always you have a large exposure to all the vendor. Would it be nice to have a tracking system? This vendor performs this contract, they deliver on time, and a substantial change in personnel or something. So in the future, when we kind of service the vendor, we can go back. Always say, hey, you don't have database. Let me see how is the performance. Right now, we don't have any of this.
That's true, and the Department of Technology is actually talking
Okay.
about establishing something like that, because I went to a vendor forum where that was discussed, is how can we base, it was actually for the vendor community, and there weren't very many state workers there, but I was there, and they were talking about how can you award contracts based on a vendor's past performance. And that is something that is in discussion at the Department of Technology, but I don't think they've come up with a solution yet.
It's Angie's list
Yeah.
multiplied.
Exactly. Right now, it's a shoot the dice. You see how good is it prepare RFP or yeah. So.
You could get a scorecard, right? You
Yes.
can say,
Now, credit score you apply on your loan, right? You need something like that.
Well, I think it's really important to get references and talk to your
Yeah.
counterparts at other departments to get that.
Yeah,
If
we-
there's nothing formal,
Exactly.
that's where you
in
really
time
get-
between,
yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely.
You also have to figure that you might be buying the company services, but it's an individual who might bounce between companies.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to track that level, but I love the idea.
Yeah. I think it's rewarding for vendor if they perform well, they're on the top, and they will get more business and so I don't think that this will be negative to vendor community as well, but this is another topic.
Yeah, and they did have a meeting yesterday. Basically, they had the first vendor management task force, kind of like small work group meeting yesterday to kind of look at exactly that thing, and potentially look at, the federal government has something called CPARS. Basically, it's a contractor performance assessment reporting system, basically that they use on the federal level. And what do you do, or something similar to that? Or can you do, or what are the metrics you use to assess vendor?
But one of the problems I think we have, at least that I've experienced, is that oftentimes you have a vendor that comes in and underbids a job. And then, because they're counting on getting change requests later on, they're counting on getting more money later on in the project, they just want to get the contract award. But then, if you work in the state, a lot of times you don't get, you can get a contract awarded, that's your budget.
Yeah.
So, you don't have any flexibility, you can't pay them more money. This has happened to us at DMB. And, the vendor underbid it. Well, what happened was one vendor bid it, got the award, then was bought out by another bigger vendor. And that bigger vendor comes in and says, well, we're not making any money on this. So, we need more money and we're not gonna perform.
So no, we could talk for days. Those are actual real things. But I would say that there are little things that if you, over time, as you learn, whether it be knowing the culture up front, knowing doing the reference and so forth, but understanding their culture. We went through that as well. Our current contractor on EBT was bought out by Xerox. Xerox is one of the biggest corporations in the world. And if I heard this 1,000 times is, there won't be any changes, okay? And I know, I've been through acquisitions. I came from the private sector.
That's not realistic.
And for about 3 months there won't be because they're trying to lull you to sleep, if you will, okay? And then the changes start to come. But if you hold to what you can, use that California is an important market. Know those things. Know that California is an important market. And I put in here, reputation it's all about profit. But believe me, don't underestimate the reputation aspect of that.
It is future sales.
Yes.
Okay, well, thanks for letting me share.
Okay. I was looking at time. So, hold on. Well, I think we're supposed to end at we're 3:50, right?
Yep.
3:50. Okay. So let me do a show of hands. We do have more slides. I can keep going to the slides very quickly. I kind of like to end on Curtis as a high note because I think that was a very good talk, and I really enjoyed it, and I liked the participation. But we can either stay and go through the rest of the slides. I won't make it as I can kick it into high speed mode and go fairly quickly, but or basically we can get out early and y'all can go and start getting ready for the speakers and everything afterwards. So, all right, who wants to go through the slides? I'll be more than happy to stay here and go through them with you. I have no problem doing that. Who wants to go and go about the day? All right. Fair enough. And with that, I think we'll end it on this. I would like to thank Curtis so much and Isla basically for coming to talk to us today. I think it's very nice. It's very nice to have that level of expertise and to get some good questions from you folks. So thank you very much for coming here. I really appreciate it, and thank you.